Welcome back. We're going to do performance now. Program component performance. It's the delivery of the day. This too is a program component that is greatly impacted based on the performance of the day. This component is probably the first that you would consider when you have serious interruptions or falls. The criteria is self-explanatory of why you would go to this one for first consideration for the reflection in an interruption. Physical, emotional, and intellectual involvement. Their projection. Carriage, clarity of movement, variety and contrast, the personality, and of course, unison and oneness that would obviously be lost if there's a problem. And the spatial awareness between partners would clearly be disrupted in the case of a fall of one or both or serious interruptions or errors. So let's talk about the physical, emotional, and intellectual involvement. Is it genuine? Is it believable? Do the skaters understand what they're doing? Are they truly performing for you something that they understand and believe in, or are they performing for you something that has been given to them? So often we see skaters, our athletes, all levels, and they are skating a program that has been instructed to them. And sometimes you may ask the question, who picked this program? Who picked this music? I don't think they did. And they were given these steps and this choreography, and they don't understand it. It's beyond them. Or they haven't taken the time to figure it out. Maybe they could understand it, but they need to talk about it so that as you watch it, you feel that they have a complete physical, emotional, and intellectual involvement. Projection is an interesting word. Typically, when you see the word projection, you think of something very large, something that is very obvious, something that is exaggerated or overdone. And you might even think it means to perform big and large. And it can be. It can be. But it also can be something very quiet. A projection can be very personal. It can be intimate. A performance can be so intimate that you almost feel that you've been invited into a private space, that they are skating for you, a private moment that they are sharing with you, and you feel honored to witness it and to be a part of it. It can affect you physically and emotionally as an official, as a judge, as you're watching it. It's so personal. Something personal that they're sharing with you. That is a different type of projection, but no less important than an outwardly obvious projection, and equally important to be rewarded and recognized. Another criteria, carriage and clarity of movement. The carriage is something we've talked about. Is it sustained? Is it intentional? Is it diminished as the program goes on? Maybe they're fatigued. Maybe there's been an error. Maybe they're not happy with the way the program's going. a number of reasons. But our job as evaluators is to recognize the difference between carriage and clarity of movement, whether it's intentional, whether it's correct, or whether it's being affected by whatever sources may be happening on that day. The carriage and clarity, I do want to mention one thing, is it must be intentional. If they're doing a classical piece and they choose to carry themselves in a classical ballet way, then that is something that they should sustain. But some of our athletes are choosing to do a little bit more contemporary pieces that might call for a different type of carriage and different type of movements. If it's intentional and it's clear, that too should be rewarded. If they're doing hip hop and they're doing movements that are not your stereotypical what you have expected to see 30 and 40 years ago of classical ballet posture, because they are now encapsulating a more contemporary line in order to intentionally, then that too is clear. As long as it's clear, then that's part of this component. All right, variety and contrast of movement and energy. We hope to see things achieved in different ways. Different movement of force, size, and level. Sometimes the changes of force, size, and level, shapes, and angles, you only see it, especially in singles, you only see it in the step sequences. It may be something that's required for a particular discipline, for an element. And so, of course, we want to see if we can appreciate this component of performance and this criteria threaded throughout the entire program. Or is it just isolated when it's required? Individuality and personality, it's always great when the skaters bring something personal and individual to their performance. And of course, in pair skating, ice dance, and synchronized skating, this is the criteria where we reflect unison and spatial awareness between partners. So the unison, performing as one unit. We like to say that unison is of the total body. It's not just do my legs match. You might find to the younger skaters or the less experienced or skilled athletes that the unison, they're satisfied or achieving only unison of leg line or of arms. But it's up to us to recognize the full bodies and how well they are of oneness. They don't necessarily, in order to have good unison, have to be doing exactly the same thing at the same time. It can actually be something that is complementary to each other. But it should give you an idea of unity as a unit and oneness. Spatial awareness between partners, oh wow. In pair skating, synchronized skating, and ice dancing. In ice dancing, more so, we are required to stay a little bit closer together, but pair skaters are allowed to have more distance. So it's interesting when they choose to have distance, is it on purpose or not? And when they're apart, how do they get back together? How seamless is it? How intentional is it? How well do they do it? And do they maintain that distance when they're not touching or connected? How well do they handle their space management between them? This is the component where you reflect that. And for synchronized skating, they as a group, of course, so important for their space management and that it stays consistent and it's not variable. Unless, of course, it is by design and intentional. We will now be moving on to the next PowerPoint.